Welcome into Boxing Scene Today. For those of us that remember Iron Mike Tyson winning his title and Jim Lampley saying, we have a new era in boxing. There is something about a young champion making their way to the top, but that's what we have in Xander Zayas. Jimmy Smith inside the ProBox TV studios, joined by the champs, Chris Algieri, Paulie Malignaggi. Chris, I know you're a big fan. You were there. What'd you think of Zayas' performance becoming champion at the tender age of 22?
You know, this fight leading up to it, I had a lot of people reaching out to me like, man, this is a tough fight. Chino Garcia is a really difficult guy to deal with. He hits hard. He's got a lot of experience. He's big. He's actually taller than Xander, and Xander's really tall for the weight class. So, it was definitely a tough matchup for Xander for his first world title fight. But I thought he looked really good. I mean, he went out there and he boxed beautifully, used that jab, his head movement, his footwork. All of it was really, really nice and pretty. And he had to earn it down the stretch. You could tell he was throwing less punches. His feet held up, his gas tank held up, but he wasn't throwing as many punches down the stretch. And Chino was coming on. He was looking for that opportunity. But all in all, I mean, 8-4, 9-3 type of fight. Xander, the most impressive thing about that performance for me was, listen, of course, boxing's looking for the next Puerto Rican star, and Xander wants to be that guy. But Xander didn't go out there and fight like he was Tito Trinidad. He didn't go out there and fight like he was Miguel Cotto. He went out there and fought like Xander Zayas. Xander Zayas is a boxer. He's a jabber. He's a mover. He's got good defense, good skills, good fundamentals. He didn't try to be something he wasn't, and I think that's the first time I've ever seen him be that guy. With a boxing style like that, he can be a difficult guy to deal with.
Now, Jorge Garcia, Paulie, came in with some big punches early, did not, as Chris said, go out there to lose. He went out there and fought hard, and he threw some big punches early. How do you like the way Zayas responded to that? How do you like his mental makeup?
Well, I think it's the moment that Zayas was waiting for to become a world champion, So he wasn't about to let Garcia steal the moment, right? But of course, you go into your first world title fight, you got to expect you're going to get resistance. For Garcia, it was also the moment of his career. Obviously, Zayas was the man of the moment. People were talking about him, but Garcia was no slouch himself. He felt like, this is also my moment. Coming off the upset winner with Charles Conwell, he knew he could pull off upsets and beat guys that, were put there to beat him. So he adequately did not show up to lose. He showed up to win. And early on, he came out throwing those big punches, very, very awkward, which is, that's why I was talking about Zayas to some people, and I said, it wasn't really the fight to look great in. It was just a fight to go grab this world championship, cement yourself among the champions, and then try to build that legacy that, a lot of people may be expecting of you. And it's a big shoes to fill to be the next Puerto Rican star. You've got to fill the shoes of guys like Wilfred Benitez, Wilfredo Gomez, Torres, you got Cotto, you got Trinidad, so you got a long lineage of big shoes to fill. I don't know that you need to try to fill those shoes in the championship winning performance like that. It's nice to do it, but I think champ Chris made a good point. He said, he boxed like Xander Zayas. He didn't try to copy any of these other guys. Now, he wasn't aggressive like Cotto or Trinidad, but did he box like Camacho? No, he didn't box like Camacho either. So eventually, we're going to need to see something that's going to stand out. But for now, I thought that, he boxed the way he needed to become a world champion and start to get himself on that next path, which is the championship road.
I heard Teddy Atlas say it many years ago when asked, how many years should it take for a guy to get to that world title opportunity? And he goes, with the amateur pedigree, 3, without the amateur pedigree, about 5. And I always take a look at that. And Chris, you and I off camera have talked about this many times. This is a guy who made his pro debut in 2019. Right? So do the math. He's 17 years old as a pro. What do you think of his trajectory, how long it's taken him to get here? Do you think it's the right moment and right time? Are they coming together perfectly?
Yeah, and I think so. And listen, I've called a lot of his fights on the way up for Top Rank on the international shows. He trains down in South Florida. I've been in the gym. I sparred with Xander. We have that running joke.
Haven't you sparred with everybody?
Yeah. We do have that running joke, and right. Xander is part of that group as well. He's been chomping at this bit for a while. And it's been really like a past probably 18 months, even 2 years. His team was like, we're ready to be a world champion, ready now. And Top Rank was kind of pumping the brakes a little bit, making sure that there was the right opportunity for them. His development was there. And I agree with exactly what you said, Jimmy, about that 5-6 year mark. That's when I won my world title. I was 5-6 years into the game as a professional, learning on the job, and I didn't have that big amateur background, so I needed that development. And Xander did have a big amateur background, but it was all in the juniors because he turned pro so young. So he didn't have that big international experience with the level of guys that you see these other guys who have really
Fighting
big
men,
amateur
Chris.
backgrounds.
Fighting men.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So he's been learning on the job as a pro. But I do believe his development is where it needs to be. And he showed that because, as the champ said, man, Chino Garcia was awkward as hell. And he's upset minded. And listen, I was in those fighter meetings with both these guys. Chino Garcia came to win. He thought he was going to win. He was supremely confident when we spoke to him. The way that he was walking around the weigh-in and the press conference, he really thought that he was going to be a world champion that night. And Xander Zayas showed up, and I think his development is absolutely right on time because he showed up and did what he needed to do to get the win. Like the champ said, he didn't need to bite down and put on like a crazy performance in the last rounds. He just needed to get this title, get that first one out of the way. Because listen, the rest of the titles in that weight class are all going to be fought tooth and nail if he's going to win anymore. And even if he does move up down the line, which they are talking about that, potentially going up to 160, there's going to be tough fights up there as well. So I think he got that first one out of the way, but he's going to have to really step up in terms of where he's going to go next. Because listen, you're a champion now. There's no more development. There's no more pick 'em fights. You go out there and you gotta fight the best of the best. I don't care how old you are. We talk about this on with Brian Norman as well. Xander's in the room now. He's gotta fight with the big dogs.
When you look at it, Paul, you took the question right out of my mouth, by the way, for Paulie. Paulie, look at 154. When you look at the champ, Fundora, of course, looking fantastic against you. You got Murtaza Aliyev. Crawford, of course, moving up. Don't think he fights again at 154 pounds. But this idea that everybody at 54, and what's this guy that we were talking to in Fresno? Yeah, Virgil Ortiz. Absolute killers at 154. How do you think kind of the young buck fits in this division? It's tough.
Yeah, it is a tough division. I think that's why it's taken him longer to win a championship. I think although Zayas had the junior amateur pedigree, not against the men in the amateurs, I still think he could have won a world championship faster had this been a normally competitive weight class. But this weight class has been extra competitive, competitive even by the standards of the word competitive. It was highly, highly competitive. So I think that, that's also why it's taken a little bit longer for them to mature him. You got to really, really stand out to be a champion in this weight class. They managed to fit through the cracks here. But I think Xander still has some things to work on. And I think, being the youngest world champion in the sport, he's going to get the chance to do that. I think Top Rank knows how to maneuver a prospect and a champion in the correct way. Even, you look at the guys who came before him, right? You look at Felix Trinidad. Who did he beat to win his first world championship? Yuri Boy Campos, who had a big knockout streak, but a lot of those guys were against nondescript guys, and Campos didn't really win at the highest level. He always got beat at the highest level. Then you look at Miguel Cotto. He beat his amateur rival, Kelson Pinto, who as a pro really went nowhere. That was probably the biggest pro fight of his career, of Pinto's career, was Cotto's was the fight against Cotto. In the amateurs, he had actually beaten Cotto. So there was that rivalry there, but Pinto wasn't a guy who excelled in the pros. So you get that first championship, and these big promoters, a lot of times they know how to maneuver you in a way where even if the weight class is stacked, they'll position you to go get it. And then from there, you sort of build. Let's not forget that there's still a way to build even in a competitive weight class. You had a welterweight division that was starting to really brew when Trinidad was there. But Trinidad won against Campos. He defended against Larry Barnes. He defended against Troy Waters. Rest in peace to Troy Waters, who, again, were solid, but they weren't some of the killers of the weight class.
A shot Pernell Whitaker, remember that? In one of his last fights, yeah.
Whitaker was actually later. Whitaker was actually once right before the Trinidad De La Hoya fight.
Right.
So at least, but Whitaker, you're right. They waited for Whitaker to get a little bit older before fighting him. So there are ways you're going to be able to maneuver to Zayas. I don't think you're going to have to fight your Virgil Ortizes of the world and your Fundoras of the world. Maybe your Keith Thurmans, but not right away. Maybe even your Tim Zubs, but not right away.
Champ, not if you ask Xander. Xander wants Fundora now.
Wants to smoke, man.
No, Xander is a competitor. Xander is the guy. Xander has always been like that. And that's a breath of fresh air because in a sport where you got guys who are trying to steal money and they themselves have no self-belief and they themselves inside themselves, no matter how they talk, feel like they suck themselves because you can tell by the way they choose opponents and the way they try to maneuver and the way they try to move. They're not trying to fight anybody, that they themselves feel like they suck. Xander, I think, is running the risk of maybe overestimating himself. At 22 years old, you run that risk because you feel like you can conquer the world and take on the world. But it's the old adage with the bull and the calf, right? I mean, I can't say it's too many curses in the adage, but I'm sure you guys have heard it.
Walk
Where
down
the
the
young
hill.
bull,
We know.
the young bull, yeah, running and walking down the hill.
Right.
But with Xander right now, he wants to run down the hill and take on everybody right now. But when you're 22 years old, Bob Arum and Bruce Trampler and Brad Goodman, the old bulls, they're saying, let's walk down the hill.
Yeah.
We'll get them all.
That's what I'm curious about a little bit, Chris. Paulie and you talk about kind of the health of the sport long term. When you look at guys, and you mentioned him, Brian Norman Jr., you look at Zayas, this idea that the youth movement in boxing is doing pretty well. I'm seeing those up-and-coming guys in their early 20s that I want to see as a fan. What does this tell you about the overall health of boxing, man?
Well, I think we're seeing a generational shift here, and it's a shift back to the way it was in the 80s, where these young guys are taking on tough fights and trying to become world champions. A couple other guys that you didn't mention is Abdullah Mason is another guy who's really young and coming up, and he's going to be fighting for his first world title against Sam Noakes coming up in September. He's another guy. He wants all the smoke. He wants the world title right away. He's been going through his development years, but he's been chomping at the bit to get those opportunities. And we're seeing more and more of these guys willing to take on tough fights, willing to fight their contemporaries and the guys around them who are around the same age. And even you mentioned Brian Norman Jr. Devin Haney fighting Brian Norman Jr. That's a great fight with two guys that are in their physical primes. It's not like Haney's 35; he's in his 20s still. So it's a really good fight between two young guys, one champion, one former champion. And I feel like there is a shift, and I think we're getting away from everyone needs to be undefeated. The O's don't need to be there. We're seeing guys, they'll have a loss, they'll take a loss, and they're still in there. And listen, if you're going to fight the best consistently, you're going to get losses. And the greatest of all time, the guys that we talk about all the time, all had losses. There's nothing wrong with that. Other than Rocky Marciano and Andre Ward and Floyd Mayweather, champions lose at the highest level if you continue to fight the top guys. So I do feel there is a shift, and that's good for the overall health of the sport, like you said.
When you look at it, Joe Calzaghe as well.
Joe Calzaghe, yeah.
But when you look at it, Paulie, who are we talking about, in your opinion, at 154 pounds, let's say this time next year? Do you think we are talking about Zayas? Do you think it's Fundora? At 154, that stacked weight class, who are we talking about in a year as the man, you think?
The man?
Yeah.
The man is Murtaza. Whether anybody goes near him or they shit their pants is another question. But Murtaza is definitely the man at that weight class. Then as far as the star power, I think right now it's Virgil Ortiz. Zayas has a potential star power, but I think it needs to still cook a little bit, and there's time for him to do it. I think... I don't know. I think Murtaza Aliyev is the boogeyman in the weight class, and he does have the world championship. He has the IBF title. We'll see how things move along because, until you see more of him, you don't know for sure. Remember, we thought Filibergovich was a boogeyman at heavyweight, and then he got knocked off, and that was it. That was it for him. But right now, Murtaza Aliyev seems like that boogeyman. He seems like that Beterbiev-esque type of fighter in the weight class, like that Golovkin-esque type of fighter in the weight class. But we'll see. I think with Zayas in about a year, we're not going to see him rushed. I think in a year, if things move correctly for him and things move well for him, maybe we're talking about a Tim Tszyu or a Keith Thurman. Maybe. And even those guys right now are now looked at as the upper top 3 or 4 or 5 of the weight class. But their names and they could still be lingering around, maybe winning in the next year as well. And they could be brought in as a title fight opponent for Zayas.
Yeah, but Chris, last question for you about this Zayas buildup would that be seen as cherry picking, taking on a good fighter who's faded a little bit, might get another win or two, as Paulie said before the fight? Do you think Zayas would take that kind of fight, and is it the right move?
I don't know if he's gonna have a choice. I think like you mentioned, Champ, all those great names, those the Brad Goodmans, the Bob Arums, the Carl Moretti's, they're gonna have their input too about what the next fight that's available is. And Xander's hungry. He's gonna want to defend that title. He's gonna want to get out there. I know he wants those big names, but that can be difficult to make because of promotional situations, networks, things like that. But yeah, I also don't know how long Xander is going to stay at 54, even though he's a world champion now. He's growing out of that weight class very, very quickly. He looked huge on fight night. I mean, He made the weight very comfortably. He looked good. His gas tank was great, but man, did he fill in come fight night. So I'm not sure how long he is for the division. He is only 22 years old. He's still growing. He's still working all the time. He's got a good frame and build even for 160. So we may not even really see him against any of those top-notch guys like we mentioned earlier. He might get a mandatory defense and then, vacate and move up and look for titles at 160, which is a much weaker division than 154. So it may not be necessarily a strategy as much as he said literally has to because he's growing out of the weight class, but it might not be a bad route either.
Before we go, thank you so much, champs. I want to give our condolences here at Pro Box TV to our own Juan Manuel Marquez, obviously his brother as well, for the loss of their father, a man who the boxing fans owe a tremendous debt for getting their 2 world championship sons into boxing in the first place. Our condolences are with you, champ. Our hearts are with you. Thank you so much. Here at Pro Box TV, this has been Boxing Scene Today, where you get all your boxing news. Join us. Find out why millions are watching.